Good afternoon. Welcome to the Business Boardcast. I'm Nikki Larkin. I am today joined by Stuart Mullins from the Clark's Eagle. Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Nikki.
So today, Stuart is a brilliant commercial lawyer. I've known him. Oh God, I think I've known him since when I started my practice. Not long after.
It's been a while
So
now.
nearly 15 years. Yeah, goes long time.
Yeah.
Not quite last century, but early this century. So we both obviously work in lots of commercial deals. So today what we're talking about, but particularly what Stuart's talking about, is we're talking about instances where you can acquire another business, but they're in a distressed state. So probably buying them usually out of administration. So we're going to explain what does that mean, what Stuart's got this fabulous 8-step process. So we're going to go through that. We are going to talk about where you could potentially find them. We're going to talk you all sorts of things. So the purpose of what we think might be thinking, why on earth would I want to buy a distressed business? Well, actually, a lot of these businesses are fundamentally good businesses, but something has gone wrong and therefore they've short cash and they've fallen over. So it could be that perhaps they had one main client stitch them up and not pay, or perhaps there was COVID could have been the thing. Perhaps it just crashed their business for 2 years, but now they're all back up and running, but they just can't get back after the debts accumulated during that time. So there's various different reasons why they might have gone. It might be that they've missed their financial confidence. So it might be like a dual situation at the moment where Next is trying to buy them out of administration. But buying one of these businesses is usually can be pretty cheap. And can really help you with building up your market share. But there's lots of cautions. So, Stuart, what should the buyer be looking for?
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for having me on today and giving me the opportunity to talk to you and your audience about acquiring a business that's distressed. And as you say, normally we're acquiring them from administration, but you can, of course, acquire business and assets through any form of liquidation or insolvency. And I suppose the start button administration is the typical route. And as you say, a lot of these businesses are quite good, and for foreseeable and sometimes unforeseeable reasons, they trip over. So what we're talking about in administration is a business that really just needs some breathing space. And the idea is that it will be placed into administration if the ability to realise that business going forward is in the interests of the creditors, i.e. they get paid off more money than they would do in a typical insolvency. So what we're fundamentally talking about here is the acquisition of assets, goodwill of a business. And as you say, there's a number of reasons why that can be quite fortuitous or advantageous for businesses. It's of course a great way to not just increase your critical mass. It's also a great way to acquire talent, because you can in a difficult recruitment market, you can end up offering lifelines to employees that hitherto would lose their work, and that can also be advantageous. But as you say, there's some interesting points that you just need to think through and be wary of. Normally, the starting point is that the insolvency practitioner who's running the administration will invite best and final offers to acquire that asset non-taken. They have a professional obligation to market the business and to acquire to dispose of it for basically the best terms. So ordinarily, I come across clients that have said XYZ's gone into administration. We've been asked to put our best and final offer forward, and can you be ready to deal with the transaction, Stu? the best and final is interesting because, and hopefully you'll appreciate that it can be a bit of a gamble, because for the reasons that I'll come on and talk about. But
yeah, so, for example, so you often see headlines of somebody bought a business for just £1. Just you're going to go in more detail, but just because they bought in £1, they still have to have the working capital to keep the business going. Therefore, they need the money for the overheads, for the staff, for the suppliers. So, yes, you can buy these things for £1, but you usually need a big war chest for the working capital as well.
That's right, and it normally, once a business has gone into administration, the administrator may trade it on under their own banner for a bit to preserve the goodwill, but they'll be keen to dispose of it as quickly as they can because it's, as you say, it's costing them money to run it. So that time pressure is important. The first thing you need to do is go and talk to Nikki and her team, because you need to look at the financials and you need to satisfy yourself that really it is worth the punt, and you need to understand what that number that you're going to pay for the business is going to be, and that has to be determined by time pressured and limited due diligence, because the administrators that are selling the business don't know it from Adam, really. They have been appointed and they're looking to dispose of it. So your ability to carry out any meaningful due diligence, as you would ordinarily expect to do under a conventional solvent sale, is significantly limited, and you are under huge time pressure to get it done. And if you accept the point that the administrator doesn't really know the business, you won't be surprised to hear that there are very, very limited, if any, warranties and representations that administrator will provide you with that you would otherwise expect to see in a conventional solvent acquisition disposal. So you're coming from the point that you're under pressure to get your bid in. You'll be under days, if not a week, to complete the deal. So you have to be prepared to work quickly. And in addition to dealing with the process, as you say, Nikki, your parallel track, if you like, is to think about who's going to go in and manage and integrate that acquisition with the team. So no warranties, no due diligence, a lot of time pressure. Hence, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that the price that you'll be paying for it will reflect the fact that it is a bit of a gamble, because you don't really know what's there until you get involved. The fundamental thing that your advisor should be looking at, though, is understanding the security and the charge position behind the business. Invariably, an administration will trigger security. So that means that if there's a mortgage or there's a debenture over the assets and undertaking, that will kick into place, and you will need to get the consents of those providers before you take those assets. Otherwise, if they don't release them, it's a bit like buying a house with another mortgage, with someone else's mortgage on it. The mortgage company owns the house and can sell those assets from under you and dispose of them to realise their exposure to the debt. So understanding that the lattice of security and charges, particularly if it's part of the group, is really important, and being clear on how you're going to get those releases through the administrator's support.
Yes, because clearly you don't want to be under those. How easy is it to get the releases? I'm thinking of, I can't think of what the name was now. I know one of my clients got stung by a business that went into administration a couple months ago, and potentially now have lost 30 grand through that. And they went into administration, but fairly quickly the assets from it were sold very quickly, and then everything else, there was nothing else left there, and that's just going through the administration process, and people are going to get pennies in the pound, if anything, probably nothing. So how long does that take? Because like you do see sometimes these things go through quite quickly, but my experience of debentures, they can take ages to get rid of. So what do they do, Stuart, to sort that out?
Yeah, so it's, as you say, it can take as long as it takes the bank to make a decision and release it. But fundamentally, the banks are quite keen to consent as long as they are satisfied that they are getting the best possible price for the business and assets, which the administrator can satisfy quite quickly by saying, look, we've gone out to a best and final situation, and this is why we think it's the person. So if it's not complicated, then the bank will normally can normally release their security in days, whereas traditionally, as you know, it can take a long time. So they're quite keen to do it because time pressure is everything. If you think the moment the business has ceased to trade, if you like, and is in administration, every minute and hour that goes by, it's less likely that orders are being processed. It's less likely that telephones are being answered. And I'll come on and talk about employees in a second. Word is getting out in the market that the company's fallen over because the employees are generally the first people to go out and say the business is gone, I need another job. That means your creditors are less likely to pay any debt because if they know the business has gone to the wall, it buys them certainly more time. And they'll be able to negotiate their position with the administrator in a more dominant way than they would if they owned a traditional deal. So you can see that this goodwill that you're trying to protect can erode very quickly. And banks, as you say, or institutional lenders with security are normally at the top of the liability list. So they're keen to get whatever they can back.
And plus, of course, HMRC have changed their position, so now they're at the top of the list.
Yeah, they are now. So under your fixed charge holder, there's a order of priority for creditors, and it used to be that HMRC didn't have the preference that they've got now, but under fixed, you then have HMRC, then you have what we call floating charge holders, then you have your unsecured creditors under that. So HMRC have gone further up the hierarchy. So once you're clear on the releases, the next issue is that you have to look and understand that the administrator is selling as seen, which means that they can't give you any warranties over ownership of any assets that are in there because they just don't know what's in there. So as part of your limited commercial due diligence, depending on the type of the business, if it's manufacturing in particular, you need to really consider your potential exposure to what we call retention of title clauses. So what we mean by that is that if you sell goods, hopefully in your terms of business, you will have a clause in there that says they remain your property until such time as they've been paid for. And why they're important is that, first of all, there's no implied right to retention of title, so you have to have it expressed in your purchase orders or your terms of business. And of course, you don't know whether or not all of the stock, the certain assets that you're going to pay for are going to be called back by somebody who has a retention of title clause. So you want to sort of, first of all, you need to understand as much as you can pre-deal what your potential exposure is, and that's talking to the existing team, talking to the administrator who will have limited knowledge, but you should ask those questions. And then secondly, in the contract, because the administrator is selling as seen, you have to have a clear process in that sale agreement as to how you're going to deal with retentions of title issues. And what I mean by that is this: an administrator will generally start the contract by saying, if there is a retention of title issue, that claimant will be able to go to the property, get their goods and stuff back, and you will indemnify us, the administrator, if you don't comply with that obligation or for any costs associated with enforcing that clause. On the basis they don't really know what they're selling, you could kind of understand why they sort of have that provision in place. But practically, you've got to think about that. As I say, firstly, it doesn't arise out of implication. It has to be expressed. So you want to understand and see that retention of title clause. And secondly, lots of retention of title clauses can be challenged for enforceability. So you want the mechanic in the contract to say, look, if somebody comes up and claims an ROT, first of all, we want to have a look at it. And secondly, we want to go and take some advice on whether or not it's enforceable or otherwise. Because things get particularly complicated if you have a commodity or raw material and you then put that raw material into a process and create another thing. As that commodity goes through the manufacturing process, the retention of title element erodes because that thing has become something else. So it is a specialist area, but as I say, you need to be aware of it. And then you also need to give some thought to, well, if I've got a factory or I've got some premises, I don't really want these people just coming up willy-nilly and knocking on the door and saying, can I have my stuff back? You need to think about timings and notice and how that impacts on the day-to-day operation of your business. So as I say, the principle that there's no getting out of it, if there's a valid ROT claim, you either have to do the deal with the creditor or you have to give them their stuff back. But the contract should provide for a thought out process as to how you're going to really deal with retention of title issues. And you need to understand that. The next area where what you have to think about here is employees and liability. So there is something called 2P that you may or may not have heard of, and 2P applies where a business acquires business and assets of another. It basically means that those employees linked to that operation transfer over all their employment rights to that new entity, and you can't dismiss them or unilaterally change their terms and conditions of employment. And if you do that, they may leave the business and they can claim that they've been unfairly dismissed. So the advice to people acquiring businesses in this situation are that they need to understand that if they are acquiring the assets and undertaking, that they are taking on these people. And therefore, going back to your point earlier, Nikki, you need to understand the implications around cash flow when wage bill increases by taking them on. Be very careful or very wary if in the process you try to create a position or situation where you acquire the assets and undertakings in a manner where you're trying to circumvent being caught by 2P. In my experience, it's a very, very high risk approach. But in simple terms,
so in practical terms, if somebody's taking on the business, they need to be very careful what they're taking on, because they might think, well, actually, yes, I want to take on this business. I want to take on the goodwill, the fixed assets, for example. But the 2P if you're only buying the assets, do the people go across, or you've just got the option of the people going across?
Yeah, it's a very fine line, and this has been heavily litigated, and there's no straight or clear answer. It really does depend on the detail. But if you're buying the assets and the undertaking, the goodwill as a going concern, effectively, 2P will always apply. So to try and deconstruct the application of 2P is a very, very dangerous game. So
therefore, if the 2P occur, is applied, and say there was 100 employees, but your business plan for taking it over was actually only need 50 of those employees. You do have to take them across, but then you would then owe the redundancy cost.
Well, you would take them on, and you'd have to honour their terms of employment, and you'd have to honour their terms of employment from the commencement date that they became employed with the previous business.
Yeah.
So you have to think about that, and you have to think about how you fit that into your cash flow modelling and your business plan, and of course, the amount that you're prepared to pay for this business going forward.
Yeah. Okay, so this is another thing where you think, oh, I'm buying a business for £1 or some other very small amount.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, you've got the ongoing costs, but something like redundancy, especially if people are either have enhanced redundancy terms. Again, I'm obviously not the employment lawyer, nor is Stuart, but if there's enhanced redundancy terms or people have been there for a long time, that redundancy cost could be quite hefty.
Absolutely right. Now, the other thing you have to think about is the practicalities of taking physical possession of these assets and things, because with a trading business, you've generally got the key management team and possibly the sellers still there day to day for it, if not the medium term, certainly the short term.
Yes.
So you've got to think about taking physical possession. Simple things. Where are the passcodes? How do you set the burglar alarm? Who has that information?
Oh my goodness, I hadn't even thought about that.
because the seller won't know. The seller won't know. Where's who hosts the domain passwords and for the social media and the website.
Oh, well, that's straight away. Who's got access to social media and the website?
What's the telephone number? How do you get the telephone number transferred over? All these things are really important to your points of sale. And certainly depending on the business, a lot of the intellectual property that you're buying may well be in drawings and schematics. So if you're acquiring a business that makes widgets, there's a very good chance that you'll probably want to understand how that widget is made, because you'll want to be able to tell that customer that you're able to service and maintain those widgets for them. And to do that, you kind of need to know how they're built. And you need to be clear.
If you're buying intellectual property, where is that detailed?
Yeah. So you sort of, as part of the process, you need to be clear on how you're going to get that information. And similarly, you might want to, because you don't really know what you're buying from administration, and you don't know the potential liabilities that you could be acquiring, such as we've talked about employees and employment. It may well be with that intellectual property, you sit in terms of, when you acquire this business, you might want to create a standalone company to take the ownership in. And you might want to
because you don't want to mess it up your other companies.
Absolutely right. And you might want to take that intellectual property and stick it into a separate company and license it back. So if it does fall over, you've safeguarded that know-how. And your advisor should be.
That's a handy tip for anybody that's running a company that's got IP to structure it that way. That's why you'll often see a holding company with sometimes it'd be a holding company and a separate one with it, but it'll be a separate entity with it in, so that it's safeguarded in case the trading company goes kaput. Technical term.
And then you also have to think about the property, because normally the property is leased and you have a landlord, and the landlord's not getting paid his rent. So the lease will generally be forfeited once the administration sale process has taken place, which means that the administrator normally selling will give you a license, which is a very, very watered down agreement, which gives you no real rights to stay in occupation of those premises. So again, if it's a business that relies on its premises, as parallel to this, you need to be talking about to the landlord about a new lease, or you need to be thinking about the implications of moving the business physically into existing premises. But understanding who the landlord is and having initial discussions is really vital. And then finally, I'll just touch on this, but there are some rules around existing management and leadership teams being able to acquire a business in administration or from an insolvency, and there's restrictions about in and around using the same or a very similar name to that existing business if you are connected in terms of being a manager or a director of the insolvent business. And if you are in that position, as many people do buy their own businesses back out of insolvency, you do need to take some specialist advice and be clear that you're complying with those elements of the insolvency legislation, because if you don't, you can become personally liable for some of the debts in the previous business. So you do need to just be properly advised and take appropriate advice so that you can manage that process and make sure you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary liability. All these things can be managed. I'm just conscious that we've got a couple of minutes left, Nikki. So in summary, I would say it can be a great opportunity, but you do have to give some thought to the things that I've talked about, not just legally, but practically, to make sure that you're going in eyes wide open and are aware of the potential risks that sit in acquiring distressed businesses.
Absolutely. So, and if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to ask them now or contact Stuart via LinkedIn. So most of you will have watched it via LinkedIn or be watching it later if you're watching it on Catch Up or YouTube. But you can find Stuart Mullins at Clark's Legal on LinkedIn and easily contact him. But yes, so really the summary is there are huge opportunities for buying these distressed businesses, but there are also a lot of risks. You have to go in with your eyes wide open. You need to do what due diligence that you can within the difficult parameters that there often are in these things, as you say, because it's a very different type of purchase. I've got. Because actually I was talking to you earlier about clients that are doing this, but actually I've just thought I have got a client doing one of these at the moment, where it's touch and go whether it's happening, because he knows the firm, obviously I'm not going to say any details, but he knows the firm is already in distress circumstances, so is trying to get hold of it before it could potentially go. But it's still, it's finding the right timing. So in getting the right opportunity, and sometimes, it's best to just wait until it has gone in the official. It's a coin toss, isn't it? Because it's how much of the value is eroded by it actually going into the administration anyway.
Yeah.
How much reputational damage does it do it? I mean, for some things, it doesn't. Laura Ashley, they're still happening, even though it went into administration and it was bought by, I can't remember, is it Next or Marks and Spencer's? One of them bought it. Jules Next is, the name is still there, So for some it doesn't, but for others, it could, be too risky and ruin the reputation, etc. Especially if there's a lot of unhappy suppliers left out of pocket.
Yes.
So
and also you need to you do need to put the groundwork in with the customers, because sometimes they may well have paid and
they might have paid deposits, which they won't have honoured.
You then have the commercial decision as to whether or not you're prepared to share some of that pain with them for the benefit of their business and goodwill going forward in the medium to longer term. So, yes, as I say, but they are a good way to acquire. If it's a solid business that's just for unforeseen circumstances hit a problem, it can be a very good way to boost your workforce. It can be a very good way to grow your market share and ultimately your bottom line.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Stuart. That was really useful. And please do contact Stuart at Clark's Legal for any questions in this area. obviously, I'm happy to discuss from a financial perspective the pros and cons of buying different businesses. Very happy to discuss those. Help you with forecasts, help you with due diligence, etc. from a financial perspective. And also, we're doing lots of joint events next year as well, but which dates to be marketed as yet. But we have lots of in-person events, which so we'll hopefully meet a lot of people, more people next year in person as well, which won't just be in our little offices. So that's very exciting. We were talking before this, and we're open. Our theory is there will be a lot of acquisitions in the next 2 years. Two primary drive. I think there's 3 drivers. There are probably more, but I'm thinking 3 main drivers. 1, businesses that have just lost the energy to keep going after the pandemic. So they're just going, I just can't do this anymore. I just want to retire. 2nd, businesses that will be going, I just don't want to trade through a recession and just want to go. And 3rdly, businesses that will be going, I want to preserve my wealth from my sale, and I don't want it going in huge capital gains increases, which could potentially happen with the changing government. We know that at the moment, the autumn statement was fairly good for business owners from the perspective of the sale. Nothing really changed. Still got our BADR, so still first million at 10%, then it's 20%. So that's still good. But all bets are off for what's going to happen once, when we have the next government. So we are here to help with any acquisition. We dynamic duo, aren't we, Stuart?
We are, Nikki. We are.
But anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Do tune in next week. I can't think offhand what my topic is next week. I'm sure it's absolutely fabulous, but not obviously as good. I haven't got it in my diary. I'm presuming, I suspect it will be a tax-related topic for next week. For all those people who are naughty and haven't got their tax returns done yet, still got 2 months to go. So we'll do something on that, I think. But anyway, thank you very much, Stuart. Have a lovely, lovely weekend.
Thank you, Nikki, and you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. And have a lovely weekend. Cheerio.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.